To kick things off, I'm going to ask Daniel to talk a little bit about one of his best engagements with a corporate, to perhaps lead with an example of a relationship with a corporate partner that has worked tremendously well, and share some lessons why he thinks that worked well.
Yeah, thank you. I'll talk specifically about FedEx in this example. We worked with FedEx early on, and one of the things I talk about when I put on my mass robotics hat is how important it is that corporates engage with automation soon. It's one of those things that it takes time to adopt. It has implications in the way you change your business. You really need to get started now, I think, is the message. And FedEx came to the table with that attitude in mind. They knew that the world is changing. Automation is really having an impact on the way they're going to do business. And they just needed to start learning about how to effectively deploy automation. And so we did a lot of work with them, simulating the way that their operations work today, showing them a number of different alternatives, different types of equipment to move their, in this particular case, it was non-conveyables, items that were too big for their standard conveyors, how to move those around in their warehouse. And just a really good partnership overall. And I think that was the biggest takeaway we had on both sides, was that, really taking a partnership approach and looking at it more that way than a supplier company type of approach really made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. And how do you begin building that relationship? I often hear startups talking about having a shared vision with your corporate partner. If you don't get over that initial shared vision of the future, maybe it's not going to be, it's not going to result in a relationship that is strategic, that is, that builds over time, let's say.
Yeah, that's really just all about good communication at the end of the day. I think sometimes corporates, that have very stringent or rigid purchasing processes may have some challenges there when you're trying to really understand the value that a particular vendor can provide when it might be something that you haven't bought in the past, right? Learning how to purchase a new type of technology or product is actually a part of the challenge that large organizations can encounter in the rapidly changing world. So again, this idea of really engaging, having a champion, a sponsor at the executive level can really help. But again, just understanding that there's going to be give and take. It's going to be a learning process on both sides. And as you engage in that in a meaningful way, it can really help success. Versus the more traditional approach of, all right, we're going to have 3 vendors out there and we're going to pit them against each other and we're going to beat them down on price. That I think works pretty well for more established commodity type products. But for the new technology, I think it's much more appropriate and productive to essentially do your due diligence, ask around, and then pick a horse, and then, you need to work with that really more on a partnership level.
Got it. Dave, I think you had a comment there as well.
Yeah, I did. I agree with Daniel's comments. I wanted to add one of our experiences, which was a partnership with Armstrong. I mentioned our first product is a steam trap monitoring solution, helps you find failed steam traps, which then need to get replaced. Armstrong happens to be the #2 steam trap manufacturer in the world, and we got connected with them and started this engagement process about how we could help each other out. It evolved into us deploying our monitoring solution in their test facility so they could vet our solution and prove to themselves that it worked. And then that resulted in engagement where we are now selling through their channel partners. And furthermore, we are building an API to interface our cloud platform to their own cloud trap management cloud platform, so that we can now tell the status of a trap and insert that directly into Armstrong's cloud interface. And then Armstrong, that immediately provides us access to about 1 million steam traps at what they call trap active customers that are interested in monitoring them. So partnerships are a great way to, just pour fuel on the fire, amplify your engagements and product as a startup.
Jason, please.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I think one thing that we've definitely been aware of, and I think makes a lot of sense, is to make sure as a startup you're really partnering in the right way, in the right place within a large enterprise. So often startups with new technologies and a new innovation get introduced into the R&D group, which is fine, and that works well. But we found that to really make progress and get real traction within that partnership, you really need commercial engagement as soon as possible. So get introduced to, the right piece of business within that group that's going to align with R&D and really take things forward in that way. We found that to be crucial. And then also very quickly get to a point where there's skin in the game on both sides. I think for startups, often they can be enamored with the size of a company and the brand name of a company, global companies. And you can spend a lot of time, a lot of resources, often limited resources, doing a lot of work. But first of all, it's so much more important to get that engagement from both sides in some kind of tangible way. Then the skin in the game from both sides of the table, and things tend to work, I think, from our perspective, extremely well. We've seen that with both Siemens and also Mitsubishi Electric. We have strategic relationships with both of them, and they've been fantastic partnerships, and both have kind of followed that path.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. John.
Yeah, and on our side, we're slightly different. We have software that's been used quite a bit. So our engagement model is to work with large corporations, and generally we engage with the CFO or chief strategy officer, and then oftentimes to the chief strategy officer, they're looking for new innovative ways to look at their business. And what we found is that with those engagements, making sure that we have clarity around exactly what's expected. So we work with them to make sure that within a relatively short period of time, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, we have agreed on what we're going to deliver, and they can assess whether our solution is going to fit into their ecosystem of decision support capabilities.
Got it. Just want to let everyone know that we relaunched the poll. We had some issues with it, forcing you to select just one option. And I think there's probably a number of startups that everyone wants to meet. So please go ahead and fill out that poll again. You can now select multiple options. Do that in the background, and we're going to continue the panel discussion here. And actually going to take an audience question here. This is for Dave, for Everactive. Do you plan to market your chips with energy harvesting sensors? Industrial application examples like vibration, corrosion, flare, and steam monitoring were shown. Do your chips sensors work in these extreme environment conditions and still harvest energy?
Yeah, I think there are a few questions in there. So first of all, on chip sales, we're a relatively small startup. We've got 67 people now, I think, and chips. We are taking this technology to market as a service, targeting industrial assets, specific assets, and to support chip sales on top of that would really require growing a whole nother side of the business. And so today we are not planning to do that. But I mentioned in my talk, the IoT is expected to be a 1 trillion node ecosystem, and we would love to have Everactive technology in as many of those nodes as possible. And that will require ultimately, I think, chip sales, for example, down the road. You mentioned sensors. We build our core chip does the energy harvesting, the processing, the wireless communication, the local data storage. But we purchase sensors, we purchase the energy harvester itself. So the photovoltaic cell, for example, we don't build in-house, we buy. The accelerometer, we don't build in-house, we buy. So, and there are industrial grade versions of all of the above. And so we've selected those and used those in our batteryless sensor. And then I think the last question was on energy harvesting in those harsh environments. And absolutely, the way we address that is we build our own custom chip. The active power consumption of our machine health monitor is around 20 microwatts. We're targeting 1 microwatt active power for our Gen 3 technology. by lowering the power requirements of the electronics, you can harvest from a lot more sources that you wouldn't normally think you could power an IoT node from. So that is the way we approach that problem: reduce the power of the electronics, but still provide continuous monitoring, continuous communication.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about the pre-pilot and the post-pilot transition there. There's this, sometimes crossing that chasm is a little bit tricky. And just even sometimes I would say, if a pilot has been successful, does not always translate to a post-pilot engagement. Anyone want to try to address that topic? What are the things that sometimes go wrong in your experience?
Yeah, I think, so I think it's a great question. And obviously we all grapple with that, but I think it's kind of similar to what I was saying before, is that making sure that everything's transparent from the beginning. So it's not just about, being in a position to win the pilot. What is the longer term opportunity? So are we able to be transparent and discuss, okay, so if we're successful in the pilot, and by the way, these are the parameters of the pilot and these are the objectives, if those are met, what are the steps there afterwards, and have those agreed. And again, if you've got the business unit involved in this, usually it can be much more explicit that way. So it isn't just let's do the pilot, get the results, and then discuss again. The pilot is a step along the process, which is already defined and hopefully scoped out and agreed upon by both parties. It's a tough thing to do. It's a lot more work up front, but if that's done ahead of time, it typically will prove to be really fruitful for both parties.
100% second that comment. Great comment.
Daniel, I think you got more to add.
Yeah, just briefly, the other aspect of that, I think, is a very good ROI model. You want to have a good ROI model that you've built going into the pilot, but then you want to continue to refine that throughout the pilot so that the return on investment of the product is very well documented and can be presented to the executive sponsorship in a compelling way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how do you deal with a changing, let's say, ROI as the pilot goes? And this is early technology, you learn new things, and the milestone moves. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, I think that's the main point of my comment is you need to be continuing to evolve the ROI model as you learn throughout the pilot, right? The pilot is a learning process, and both sides are learning. You may be learning where the technology can focus more. You may be learning how to adopt it better or adapt your operations to best take advantage of the technology. And those all have implications on ROI. So making sure that the ROI model isn't something that's built once up front to justify an initial purchase decision and then forgotten, but it's a living document that's shared between both parties.
Marcus, if I may, just quick point back to Jason's earlier comment too. If you've negotiated those terms, the expectations and the goals ahead of time, I think that helps to prevent, potential partners from moving the goalposts, so to speak.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jason, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, just nodding in agreement.
Sorry, I meant John there. I'm looking at the wrong name.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. I think it's really important that you make sure that you have the end user, the person who's going to, or the part of the organization that's going to purchase your product for post-pilot involved in this. Oftentimes there's an intermediary, sort of a vetting group. And if all you deal is with the vetting group and you don't get all the way through to see who's the end user, that's where you get yourself into trouble, because you actually don't always know their real expectations. And when you have that gap between how you're being vetted and what the expectation is for the ongoing use of your solution, that's where you end up with issues. So that's the point that I would make when you get involved in these pilots.
Is it reasonable for a startup to ask more specifics around the business problem, around the business owner, and try to get introduced early in the process, or what do you suggest?
I think it has to do with the nature of the problem. So if we do this for you, whose problem are we solving? And I generally ask, and do they have the budget to solve that problem? I've solved problems in my career for people who couldn't afford a solution, and that's always problematic. And you don't you can spend a lot of time and energy before you find out that they either choose not to or don't want to invest in a solution. But I guess that would be the question. I think all of us are sort of saying the same thing, is you need to spend as much time as you can up front and ask some of those more difficult questions, because it pays out dramatically. And if you go in too fast and you're so excited about the ability to just do a pilot, that's where you can get yourself in trouble 3 to 4 months down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the business unit ultimately has to be involved at some point. So if you start in R&D, you can do whatever you need to do there with a POC, and then they have to internally sell it to the business unit. So if you bring them in from the beginning, they can be the catalyst behind it and the driving force, and you've already got them involved through the process. And so as we were saying earlier, you're going to learn as you go along and things will change. But if you've got the business unit along for the ride from the beginning, it's going to make things much more streamlined and much more successful, generally speaking.
Understood. And I think we're going to have to wrap up here. So thank you very much for that discussion. Thank you for your presentations. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, day 2 of the STEX25 showcase will be on Thursday, same time. We'll have 8 new startups present then, and we look forward to welcoming you then.